This is the Battle of the Catalonian Plains by Zach Richmond. Key players: Attila, king of the Huns; Flavius Aetus, the last of the Romans; Theodoric I, king of the Visigoths. Background: Flavius Aetus was previously an exile who had spent time as a Hunnic hostage. Because of this, he had an amicable relationship with Attila and maintained the relations between the Roman Empire and the Hunnic Empire. This changed when Honoria, sister of Emperor Valentinian III, asked Attila to help her avoid an arranged marriage. She sent one of her rings as proof of her identity along with a message. Attila interpreted this as an offer of marriage and used it to claim half of the Roman Empire as his own. Unfortunately, the land he claimed belonged to his old acquaintance, Aetus. While Aetus was not emperor, he was the de facto ruler of Gaul and exerted large amounts of power in the region. The Battle of Chalons is also known as the Battle of Catalaunian Plains and took place in the year 451. This battle saw Attila and his Hunnic army against the Western Roman Empire. Flavius Aetus is sent to stop his pillage of the cities of Gaul. He convinced King of the Visigoths, Theodoric I, to help him repel Attila. They reach Attila as he's sacking the Alan-controlled city of Orleans. The Huns retreat back towards the empire, but know that they must stop and make a stand as they tire and run low on supplies. The Romans seek to push the Huns out of the empire and hopefully prevent further invasions through a show of strength, while a win for Attila allows him to escape with his riches and possibly embolden him to forge future attacks on the weakening empire. The battle. The two forces met somewhere around Chalons, with Attila taking cover in his wagon encampment before the battle. According to Jordanes, a 6th century Roman historian, there was a hill that was of key strategic importance that the Visigoths eventually took to the Roman side after a purported skirmish with the Huns, who also wished to occupy the hill. Sangiban, the leader of the Alans, formed the middle, with Aetus on the left and the Visigoths on the right. Waiting until almost sundown, as Attila was not confident about his chances of victory and wanted to be able to retreat in the dark, according to Jordanes, the battle commenced. Attila pushed his forces forwards to engage with the Alan center, with his supporting Ostrogoth troops engaged with the Visigoths. The Alan line immediately began to break, and the Visigoths and Romans were able to envelop the Huns. Theodoric was killed in the Ostrogoth assault, while the Gepid forces retreated without engaging. Thorsmund, Theodoric's son, flanked the Ostrogoths and pushed them back to the wagon encampment. As the Alans were being pushed back, Aetus's forces, who were yet to be engaged, were able to hold their line and send reinforcement to flank Attila's forces. When Attila saw that he was losing both flanks, he retreated back to his wagon encampment and the battle ended for the night. While sources indicate that the Roman Visigoths and Alans prepared to attack Attila in the morning, it seemed that no second attack ever came, as Attila was able to retreat and Thorsmund went back to his father's land to become king. Aftermath. Many contemporaries of the battle suggest that this was a Roman Gallic victory. Prosper of Aquitaine, who is a historian in the region alive at the time of the battle, says, "It appears that the Huns were defeated in this battle because they turned back home." While the battle itself may have been a stalemate, many argue that this battle showed that Attila was not invincible. His pillage through Gaul in 450 through 451 was brutal. However, after this battle, Attila was ready to throw himself on a funeral pyre because he didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of killing him. Also, Aetus had hoped for both the Visigoths and the Huns to retreat, which is exactly what happened. This preserved the balance of power in the region, with neither the Visigoths nor the Huns being more powerful than the other. Some historians argue that this was either a Roman defeat or indecisive. Hyun Jin Kim argues that this was a Hunnic victory, as the Romans left without totally vanquishing their foe. They signed no treaty or surrender and were allowed to freely retreat from the battlefield. This battle was important to the history of the world. It's considered the last great battle of the Western Roman Empire. It protected the empire and showed that Attila was not untouchable. It also secured victory without letting the Visigoths become too emboldened by their win. Therefore, the balance of power in Western Europe was maintained.
In Edward Creasy's 15 Decisive Battles of the World, From Marathon to Waterloo, Chapter 4, he writes,
It is probable that the crafty Aetius was unwilling to be too victorious. He dreaded the glory which his allies the Visigoths had acquired, and feared that Rome might find a second Alaric in Prince Thorismund, who had signalized himself in the battle, and had been chosen on the field to succeed his father Theodoric. He persuaded the young king to return at once to the capital, and thus relieved himself at the same time the presence of a dangerous friend, as well as a formidable though beaten foe.
According to Arthur Farrell in his book Attila the Hun and the Battle of Chalons, he says,
After he secured the Rhine, Attila moved into central Gaul and put Orleans under siege. Had he gained his objective, he would have been in a strong position to subdue the Visigoths and Aquitaine. But Aetius had put together a formidable coalition against the Hun. Working frenetically, the Roman leader had built a powerful alliance of Visigoths, Alans, and Burgundians, uniting them with their traditional enemy, the Romans, for the defense of Gaul. Even though all parties to the protection of the Western Roman Empire had a common hatred of the Huns, it was still a remarkable achievement on Aetius' part to have drawn them into an effective military relationship. This battle was not important. Attila was already leaving the empire when he was attacked. The defense of Orleans was much more important. Besides, Attila would be dead in a few years and his empire destroyed in less than 20.
Ian Hughes writes in Aetius, Attila's Nemesis, that
the main objection must remain that Attila's empire only existed while he was alive. Upon his death, it fragmented. Gaul might have been damaged and the specific history of France changed, but Christianity would have been maintained and the impact of the Huns would have been only fleeting. In the time of war, it has been suggested that the population of towns, knowing they were likely to be the focus of an attack, would leave and take refuge in the surrounding countryside. A large proportion of the population would have survived unharmed.
J.B. Bury in the History of the Later Roman Empire writes,
If Attila had been victorious, and if he had defeated the Romans and the Goths at Orleans, and if he had Gaul at his mercy and had translated, and we have no evidence that was his design, the seat of government and the abode of the people from the Theiss to the Seine or the Loire, there is no reason to suppose that the course of history would have been seriously altered. For the rule of the Huns in Gaul could have only been a matter of a year or two. It could have not survived there any more than it survived in Hungary. The death of the Greek king, on whose brains and personal character it depended. Without depreciating the achievement of Aetius and Theodoric, we must recognize that, at worst, the danger they averted was of totally different order from the issues were at stake in the fields of Plataea and Meritarus. If Attila had succeeded in his campaign, he would have probably been able to compel the surrender of Honoria, and if a son had been born of their marriage and proclaimed Augustus in Gaul, the Hun might have been able to exercise considerable influence on the fortunes of that country, but that influence probably would have not been anti-Roman. Personal interpretation. While it's important to acknowledge that many of the sources are heavily influenced and exaggerated, this battle is important. The battle ensured that the Visigoths did not kill Attila, which would have led to an imbalance of power. You see, after Attila's death, the empire fractures. This battle could have also extended the length of stability in the region, even if only for a few more years. It also led to the realization that Attila was not invincible. He was ready to commit suicide so that no army had the joy of killing him. This weakened version, the most vicious kill in recent memory, had to be a comfort to all Europeans who had their cities destroyed by Attila. The interpretation put forward by Arthur Farrell talks about the new alliances during the fall of the Roman Empire, with Visigoths, Alans, and Burgundians united with their traditional enemy over a common hatred of the Huns, with a massive number left dead after this battle, which some sources estimate in the hundreds of thousands, according to Jordanes. All three forces present against the Huns were weakened significantly, which led to a vacuum for the Franks to take control of the region of Gaul in the future. This also ensured that Attila was not able to marry Honoria or father a child that could be the heir of the Roman Empire. I think the claim that Attila would have turned France and Italy into cultural wastelands without Christianity is dramatic and perhaps overreaction. There's no telling what Attila could have done without the massive amounts of casualties inflicted at the Battle of Catalaunian Plains. I believe this battle also was not a Roman victory and is instead indecisive. While it was an important battle and they certainly did not lose, I'm hard-pressed to call it a victory. Many died, and the king of the Visigoths died, nearly causing a succession crisis. This was certainly the last great battle of the empire, but to let your enemy retreat after disbanding your forces as you decide what to do next is not a victory. Bringing Attila to the point where he was planning on committing suicide if he was going to be overrun was impressive, but still not necessarily a win.